There comes a moment in life, quiet, almost invisible, where everything inside you wants to stop. Not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly. A thought, a whisper, a question. What if I just quit? And that moment, that small, almost forgettable moment, is where most lives change direction. Because most people don't fail when things collapse. They fail when things get uncomfortable, when the path gets unclear, when progress slows down, when effort stops feeling rewarding. That's when the mind begins to negotiate. It starts offering exits. It starts rewriting the goal. It starts protecting you from growth. And if you've never trained your mind, you will listen. In this audiobook, Never Give Up. Train your mind to never give up. Full audiobook, you're about to step into a different way of thinking. Not motivation, not hype. Yeah, not temporary energy, but discipline. The kind that stays when everything else fades. You will learn how to recognize the exact moment your mind tries to escape. How to rebuild your thinking under pressure. How to turn resistance into fuel. How to develop a mindset that does not quit, even when it would be easier to. Because here's the truth most people never hear. Your life does not change when things get easier. Your life changes when your mind gets stronger. Throughout this journey, we will walk through 25 chapters, each one revealing a layer of discipline most people never build. You will understand why quitting becomes a habit, how your environment shapes your persistence, why emotions cannot be trusted when building anything meaningful, how to stay focused in a world designed to distract you, and most importantly, how to become someone who finishes what they start. This is not theory. This is a mental training system. And one more thing before we begin. This audiobook is not financial advice, not medical advice, not life instruction carved in stone. This is education, reflection, and a mirror. What you do with it is entirely up to you. But if you stay until the end, you will not think the same way again. Because the person who never gives up is not born. They are built, and it begins right now. Chapter 1. Quitting is not who you are. It's what you've practiced. Let's be honest. Most people don't think of themselves as quitters. They don't wake up and say, I'm someone who gives up. But look at the pattern. How many times have you started something full of energy, full of intention, only to stop when it got difficult? A workout plan abandoned after 2 weeks, a project left unfinished, a skill you once wanted, now forgotten. And every time it happened, you told yourself a story. I'll come back to it later. This isn't the right time. Maybe this just isn't for me. But here's what's really happening. Every time you quit, you are not just stopping. You are training. You are teaching your brain something. You are reinforcing a pattern. And over time, that pattern becomes automatic. Your mind begins to expect quitting. It begins to prepare for it. It begins to suggest it earlier and earlier until one day you don't even fight it anymore. This idea is deeply reflected in the kind of mindset patterns explored in materials like Where Quitting Isn't a Personality Trait, but a Learned Response Built Through Repetition. And that should change everything for you, because if quitting is learned, it can be unlearned. Let's go deeper. When you were a child, you didn't quit easily. You fell and got back up again and again and again. There was no internal voice telling you to stop. There was no identity built around failure. There was only movement. Persistence was natural. So what changed? Conditioning. Over time, you were taught comfort, rewarded for ease, distracted by convenience, surrounded by instant gratification. And slowly, your tolerance for difficulty dropped. Your mind began to associate discomfort with danger. And now, every time something feels hard, your brain interprets it as a signal to stop. But here's the truth. Discomfort is not danger. Discomfort is direction. The moment something feels difficult, you're not breaking, you're building. But if your mind hasn't been trained to understand that, it will pull you away from growth every single time. So the first step is awareness, not judgment, not guilt, just awareness. Notice when your mind starts looking for an exit. Notice the excuses it creates. Notice how convincing it sounds. Because it will sound logical, it will sound protective, it will sound like it's helping you, but it's not. It's repeating a pattern. And patterns can be rewritten. Starting today, every time you feel like quitting, pause, not to escape, but to observe. Ask yourself, is this real or is this a habit speaking? Because that one question creates space, and in that space, you regain control. You stop reacting. You start choosing. And that is where discipline begins, not in action, but in awareness, because you cannot change what you do not see. And once you see it, you can no longer ignore it. But here's where it gets uncomfortable, because awareness alone is not enough. You're about to discover why most people stay stuck, even after they realize what's holding them back, and why breaking the habit of quitting requires something far deeper than motivation. Dear friend, we are just starting to work on this channel, so your likes and subscriptions will greatly help us grow. Don't be indifferent. Thank you. Chapter 2. The moment you want to quit is the moment you must stay. There is a specific moment, and if you've lived long enough, you know exactly what it feels like. It's not the beginning. The beginning is easy. It's not the end. The end is visible. It's the middle, that quiet, frustrating, invisible middle, where effort is high, but results are nowhere to be found, where you've already invested time, already sacrificed comfort, already told yourself this matters, and yet nothing seems to be working. That's where the mind begins its most dangerous work. It doesn't attack you directly. It whispers, maybe this isn't worth it. Maybe you're forcing something that's not meant for you. Maybe you should try something else. And here's the problem. Those thoughts feel reasonable. They don't feel like weakness. They feel like logic. That's why most people quit. Not because they are incapable, but because they are convinced. Convinced that stopping is smart. Convinced that leaving is justified. Convinced that quitting is the right decision. But let's expose the truth. That moment, that exact moment when everything feels uncertain, is not a sign to stop. It is a test of identity, a test of whether you are the kind of person who follows emotions or the kind of person who follows decisions. Because emotions will always fluctuate. There will be days you feel unstoppable and days you feel completely empty. If your actions depend on how you feel, you will always be inconsistent. And inconsistency destroys everything. Think about it. How many people start strong, but disappear quietly? How many goals are abandoned, not because they were impossible, but because they became uncomfortable? This is where discipline separates itself. Discipline is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wait for motivation. It simply says, I'm doing this, whether I feel like it or not. And that's the shift. Because when you rely on motivation, you are at the mercy of your emotions. But when you rely on discipline, you take control. Now listen carefully. The moment you feel like quitting is not random. It is predictable. It happens when progress slows, results delay, effort increases, clarity decreases. In other words, it happens exactly when growth is about to happen. But growth doesn't feel like progress. It feels like resistance. It feels like confusion. It feels like frustration. It feels like doubt. That's why most people miss it. They think they're stuck, when in reality, they're being shaped. Let's go deeper. Imagine you're lifting weights. The muscle doesn't grow when it's easy. It grows when it's strained, when it's pushed beyond comfort, when it's forced to adapt. Your mind works the same way. Every time you push through discomfort, you're building mental strength. Every time you stay when you want to leave, you are reinforcing a new identity. Not someone who tries, but someone who finishes. And this is where everything changes. Because once your identity shifts, your actions follow automatically. You no longer need to convince yourself. You no longer need external motivation. You become someone who simply does what must be done. But here's the part most people don't understand. You don't build that identity by winning. You build it by staying. Staying when it's boring, staying when it's frustrating, staying when no one is watching, staying when quitting would be easier. That's the real work. And it's invisible. No applause, no recognition, no instant reward. Just you and your decision. And this is where most people fall apart, because they expect progress to feel good. They expect growth to feel exciting. They expect discipline to feel empowering. But the truth is, most of the time, it feels like nothing, just repetition, just effort, just showing up again and again with no guarantee. And yet, this is exactly what creates results. Not intensity, not bursts of motivation, but consistency. Small actions, repeated relentlessly. Even when they feel meaningless, even when they feel unnoticed, because those small actions are not small. They are building something slow, something quiet, something powerful, a mind that does not quit. So the next time you feel that urge, that pull to stop, don't panic. Don't react. Pause. And remind yourself, this is the moment that matters. Not when it's easy, not when it's exciting, but right here, in this discomfort, because this moment is shaping who you are becoming. And if you can stay here just a little longer than before, you've already changed. But now comes the harder truth, because staying once is not enough. You have to build a system that makes staying your default. And that's where most people fail, because they rely on willpower instead of structure. And what you're about to discover next will completely change how you approach discipline. Dear viewers, write which city you're from. It's interesting to see which corners of the world are watching our videos. Chapter 3. Willpower is weak. Systems are strong. There's a lie most people believe, a quiet lie, a dangerous one. It says, if I just try harder, I'll be more disciplined. And for a while, that works. You push yourself. You force effort. You rely on bursts of motivation. But then something happens. You get tired, not physically, mentally. Decision fatigue sets in. Emotions fluctuate. Life interrupts your rhythm. And suddenly, the same person who was so determined a week ago can't even start. Why? Because willpower is unreliable. It's not designed to carry your life. It's designed for short bursts. moments of decision, not long-term consistency. And yet, most people build their entire life strategy around it. They say, I'll just be more motivated tomorrow. I'll just push harder next time. I'll just try again when I feel ready. But here's the truth. If your success depends on how you feel, your success will always be unstable because feelings change constantly. But systems don't care how you feel. They operate regardless. And that is where real discipline lives. Let's break this down. Imagine two people. The first one relies on willpower. Every day they decide whether to work. Some days they do. Some days they don't. Their progress is inconsistent. Their identity is unclear. The second person builds a system. They don't decide every day. They've already decided once. They have a routine, a structure, a non-negotiable process. They don't ask, do I feel like it? They ask, what's next? And then they do it. That's the difference. Not talent, not intelligence, structure. This idea echoes deeply in disciplined frameworks seen across high-performance habits, where relying on emotion leads to inconsistency, but structured repetition builds identity. So let's get practical. What is a system? A system is a decision you've already made, so you don't have to make it again. It removes friction. It removes negotiation. It removes the daily debate inside your mind, because that debate is where most people lose. Think about your morning. If you wake up and immediately start deciding, should I get up? Should I check my phone? Should I work out? You've already created opportunities to fail, because every decision is a chance for your mind to choose comfort. But if you have a system, you eliminate that space. You wake up and you move. No discussion, no hesitation, just action. This is why high performers don't rely on motivation. They rely on structure. They design their environment to support discipline. They reduce distractions. They create routines that are harder to break than to follow. And over time, those routines become identity. You don't become disciplined by trying harder. You become disciplined by removing the option not to be. Let that sink in. Because most people are negotiating with themselves all day. I'll do it later. I'll skip today. I deserve a break. And every time they negotiate, they weaken their own authority. They teach their mind that their commitments are flexible, optional, temporary. But when you build a system, you send a different message. You say, this is who I am. Not sometimes. Not when it's convenient. Always. And that's powerful. Because identity is the foundation of behavior. If you see yourself as someone who tries, you will act accordingly. But if you see yourself as someone who executes, everything changes. Now here's where it gets even more important. Your system doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be consistent. Small actions, repeated daily, that's it. Not extreme effort, not overwhelming routines, just sustainable discipline. Because the goal is not intensity. The goal is longevity. You're not building a burst, you're building a life. And lives are not changed in moments. They are changed in patterns. So ask yourself, what decisions am I making every day that I could eliminate? What habits am I leaving up to chance that should be automatic? Where am I relying on motivation instead of structure? Because every area of your life either has a system or has chaos. And chaos always leads to inconsistency. But systems create freedom. Freedom from overthinking, freedom from hesitation, freedom from quitting. Because when your actions are automatic, Your mind has less power to interfere, and that's the goal. Not to silence your mind completely, but to reduce its control. Because your mind will always try to protect you. It will always suggest comfort. It will always look for the easy way out. That's its job. But your job is to lead it, not follow it. And systems are how you do that. But now we need to go deeper, because even with systems, there's something that can still break you, something stronger than habits, stronger than routines, stronger than structure itself, your environment. And what you're about to realize might be the reason you've struggled to stay consistent, no matter how hard you've tried. If you appreciate our efforts and our thoughts, subscribe and like this video. We need to show the world that there are many people like us. We must always continue to improve. Chapter 4. Your environment is either training you to quit or teaching you to endure. You can have the best intentions in the world. You can wake up motivated. You can build a plan. You can even create a system. But if your environment is not aligned, it will slowly break you, not all at once, but piece by piece. Because here's the truth most people ignore. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your environment. Let's make this real. If your phone is always within reach, distraction becomes automatic. If the people around you normalize quitting, quitting becomes acceptable. If your space is chaotic, your mind follows. And over time, you start believing something is wrong with you. You think, why can't I stay consistent? Why do I always lose focus? Why do I keep falling back? But it's not just you. It's what surrounds you, because your environment is constantly shaping your behavior, silently, subtly, powerfully. And if you don't take control of it, it will take control of you. Let's go deeper. Every action you take is influenced by what is easiest in your current setup. Not what is right, not what is important, what is easiest. So if the easiest option is distraction, you will be distracted. If the easiest option is comfort, you will choose comfort. If the easiest option is quitting, you will quit. Not because you're weak, but because your environment is designed that way. This is why discipline feels so hard for most people. They're trying to build strong habits inside weak environments. They're trying to stay focused in spaces built for distraction. They're trying to grow while surrounded by things that keep them small. And that will always feel like a battle. Because it is. But here's the shift. You don't win that battle by fighting harder. You win it by redesigning the battlefield. By making discipline easier and distraction harder. By changing what is visible, what is accessible, what is normalized. Because when your environment supports your goals, you no longer need to rely on constant effort. You create momentum. Let's make this practical. Look at your daily life. What do you see first when you wake up? Your phone, notifications, noise, or clarity, space, intention? What is within arm's reach? Distractions or tools for growth? Who are you around most often? People who complain, or people who build? People who settle, or people who push? Because whether you realize it or not, you are absorbing all of it. Your standards, your habits, your expectations are being shaped daily. And if you don't choose your environment, you inherit it. Now listen carefully. This is not about perfection. You don't need a perfect setup. You need a supportive one. Small changes that remove friction from discipline, that make it easier to act and harder to avoid. For example, if you want to read more, put the book where your phone usually is. If you want to train your body, prepare your space the night before. If you want to focus, remove what breaks your attention. Simple, but powerful, because every small adjustment reduces resistance, and when resistance is lower, consistency becomes possible. But environment is not just physical, it's also emotional. It's the conversations you allow, the energy you tolerate, the voices you listen to. Because if you're constantly surrounded by negativity, doubt becomes natural. If you're surrounded by excuses, effort feels unnecessary. If you're surrounded by comfort, growth feels extreme. And that's dangerous, because slowly you begin to lower your standards, not intentionally, gradually, until one day you look at your life and realize you've adapted to something you never wanted. So you have to decide, what am I allowing to shape me? What am I tolerating that is quietly holding me back? What needs to change, not in me, but around me? Because discipline is not just internal, it's environmental. And once you understand that, you stop blaming yourself and start designing your life. But here's where it gets deeper, because even with the right environment, even with the right systems, there is still one force that can break everything, your emotions. Because when pressure rises, when stress hits, when things go wrong, your emotions will try to take control. And if you don't learn how to manage them, they will undo everything you've built. Chapter 5. Your emotions are not leaders. They are signals. There will be days when everything inside you feels heavy, not dramatic, not explosive, just heavy. The kind of weight that makes simple things feel difficult. The kind of resistance that makes you question everything. And in those moments, your emotions will speak the loudest. They will say, rest today. Skip this one. You're not in the right state. Do it tomorrow. And it will feel justified. Because emotions are convincing. They don't sound like weakness. They sound like truth. But here's the shift that changes everything. Your emotions are not instructions. They are information. Let that settle. Because most people live their entire lives following how they feel. If they feel good, they act. If they feel bad, they stop. And that creates a pattern, a dangerous one. Because feelings are unstable. They change with sleep, with stress, with environment, with thoughts. They are not built to guide your life. They are built to respond to it. So when you let emotions lead, you're constantly changing direction. And when direction keeps changing, nothing gets built. Now, this doesn't mean you ignore your emotions. That's not strength. That's suppression. And suppression always comes back stronger. The goal is not to silence your emotions. The goal is to understand them without obeying them. There's a difference, a powerful one. Let's break it down. When you feel tired, that's a signal, but it doesn't always mean stop. Sometimes it means adjust, slow down, but continue. When you feel overwhelmed, that's a signal, but it doesn't mean quit. Sometimes it means simplify, refocus, but keep moving. When you feel doubt, that's a signal, but it doesn't mean you're incapable. Sometimes it means you're stepping into something unfamiliar, and unfamiliar always feels uncertain. But uncertainty is not danger, it's growth. And this is where most people lose control. They mistake emotional discomfort for a reason to stop. But discomfort is part of the process. It's not a warning sign. It's a training ground. Think about this. Every time you try something meaningful, you will feel resistance, not because it's wrong, but because it's new. Your brain is wired to protect you from the unknown. It prefers patterns. It prefers certainty. It prefers safety. So when you step outside of that, it sends signals: fear, doubt, hesitation. But those signals are not instructions. They are just reactions. And if you can learn to separate the two, you gain control. You stop reacting automatically. You start responding intentionally. And that's where discipline deepens. Because now, you're not just acting despite how you feel, you're understanding why you feel it and choosing your response anyway. That's power, real power, not loud, not aggressive, but controlled. Now here's the important part. You will not always feel strong. You will not always feel clear. You will not always feel ready. And if you wait for those feelings, you will wait forever. Because readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision. You become ready by acting, not before. Confidence doesn't come first. Clarity doesn't come first. Action comes first. And everything else follows. But your emotions will try to reverse that. They will say, wait until you feel better. Wait until you're sure. Wait until it's easier. And if you listen, you will stay exactly where you are. So the next time you feel that resistance, pause, not to escape, but to observe. Name it. This is discomfort. This is doubt. This is fear. And then ask yourself, does this mean I should stop? Or does this mean I'm growing? Because that question breaks the pattern. It creates space between feeling and action. And in that space, you choose, not your emotions, you. But here's where it gets even more real, because there will be moments when it's not just emotions, when it's not just discomfort, when it's not just doubt. There will be moments when you fail, when things don't work, when effort doesn't pay off, when you do everything right and still fall short. And in those moments, your mind will try to convince you that it's over, that it's not worth continuing, that this is proof you should stop. And if you don't understand failure, you will believe it. But what you're about to discover next will completely redefine what failure actually is and why it's not the end, but the exact point where most people miss their breakthrough. Chapter 6. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the process. There is a moment, and if you've experienced it, you know how quiet it can be. You gave your time. You gave your effort. You stayed consistent. You pushed through discomfort, and still, it didn't work. No reward. No breakthrough. No visible progress. Just silence. And in that silence, a dangerous thought begins to form. What if this is proof that I'm not meant for this? That thought has ended more dreams than failure ever could, because failure itself is not what stops people. It's what they believe failure means. Most people see failure as an ending, a signal to stop, a confirmation of limitation, a judgment of ability. But that definition is completely wrong, because failure is not a verdict. It is feedback. Let that sink in. Because when you change what failure means, you change how you respond to it. And when you change your response, you change your outcome. Let's go deeper. Every time you attempt something, you are entering a process of learning, a process of adaptation, a process of refinement. And in that process, failure is not optional. It's required. Because without failure, there is no information, no correction, no growth, no evolution. Think about it. If everything worked perfectly the first time, you wouldn't learn anything, you wouldn't improve, you wouldn't adjust, You wouldn't develop strength. You would stay the same. And staying the same is the real failure. But when something doesn't work, you gain something far more valuable than success. You gain clarity. You see what needs to change. You understand what doesn't work. You refine your approach. And that's progress, even if it doesn't feel like it. But here's where most people get stuck. They experience failure. And instead of analyzing it, they personalize it. They don't say, this method didn't work. They say, I didn't work. And that shift is destructive. Because now, it's not about improving a process, it's about questioning your identity. And once identity is attacked, confidence collapses, effort decreases, doubt increases, action slows down, until eventually you stop trying. Not because you can't succeed, but because you believe you can't. And that belief becomes your reality. So we need to break that pattern immediately. Failure is not who you are, it is what happened, and what happened can be changed, adjusted, refined, improved, but only if you stay in the process. Because the truth is, every person who has ever achieved something meaningful has failed more times than you realize, not once, not twice, hundreds of times, quietly, privately, without recognition. And the only reason you don't see it is because failure is invisible. People don't showcase it. They don't celebrate it. They hide it. But it's there, behind every success, behind every breakthrough, behind every result. And if you remove failure from the equation, you remove the possibility of success. So the goal is not to avoid failure. The goal is to become someone who can face it, learn from it, and continue anyway. That's resilience, not perfection, persistence. Now here's the real shift. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? Ask, what is this teaching me? Because that question keeps you moving. It keeps you in control. It turns failure into fuel. And when you start seeing failure this way, you stop fearing it. You stop avoiding challenges. You stop playing small. Because you understand that every attempt is building you, even if the result isn't immediate, even if the progress isn't visible, even if the outcome isn't what you expected. You are still moving forward, and forward is what matters. But there's another layer to this, because failure doesn't just test your strategy, it tests your patience. And patience is something most people don't have. Because we live in a world that rewards speed, instant results, quick wins, immediate feedback. And when those don't come, people assume something is wrong. They assume they're behind. They assume they're failing. But what if you're just early? What if the result you're expecting simply hasn't caught up to your effort yet? Because real progress is not immediate. It's delayed. It builds quietly, slowly, under the surface, until one day it becomes visible. But most people quit before that moment arrives. They leave too early. They stop too soon. They walk away right before the breakthrough. And that's the real tragedy. Not failure, but premature quitting. So the question becomes, can you stay long enough? Can you continue without constant validation? Can you trust the process, even when it feels uncertain? Because that is where discipline becomes real, not when things are working, but when they're not. And you choose to continue anyway. But now we need to go even deeper, because staying consistent through failure requires something most people never develop: patience with progress. And what you're about to discover next will challenge everything you believe about time, effort, and results. Dear viewer, We strive to create high-quality videos for you. Please assist us in improving our efforts by commenting on what you like about the video and what you would change or add. We would be very grateful. Chapter 7. Progress is slow until it isn't. There is a phase, and almost nobody talks about it. Not because it's rare, but because it's uncomfortable. It's the phase where you're working, but nothing seems to be changing. You're showing up. You're putting in the effort. You're staying consistent. But when you look at your life, it feels the same. No visible results, no clear breakthroughs, no external validation, just repetition. And in that repetition, doubt begins to grow. Is this even working? Am I wasting my time? Should I be doing something else? This is the phase where most people quit, not because they failed, but because they can't see progress. And that's the trap. Because real progress is not always visible. In fact, most of it isn't, at least not in the beginning. Let's break this down. Imagine planting a seed. You water it. You take care of it. You show up every day. But for a long time, nothing appears. No growth. No movement. No sign that anything is happening. Now imagine if you judged progress based only on what you could see. You would assume nothing is working. You would stop, and you would never realize that beneath the surface, everything was changing. Roots were forming, strength was building, foundations were being created, quietly, invisibly, and that's exactly how your growth works. When you start building discipline, you don't see it immediately. When you start training your mind, there's no instant reward. When you start changing your habits, the results are delayed. But just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. And this is where patience becomes critical. Because without patience, you will abandon progress before it becomes visible. Now, here's the truth most people don't want to hear. The beginning of every transformation feels like nothing is happening. And that's why it's so easy to quit. Because your effort and your results are out of sync. You're putting in the work today, but the reward comes later, sometimes much later. And if you don't understand that delay, you will misinterpret the process. You will think, this isn't working, when in reality, it's just not ready yet. Let's go deeper. Your brain is wired for immediate feedback. It wants to see results now. It wants confirmation now. It wants proof now. But meaningful growth doesn't operate on that timeline. It accumulates, slowly, quietly, like drops of water carving stone. Each action may seem small, insignificant, unnoticeable. But over time, those small actions create massive change, not overnight, but inevitably. And that's the shift. You stop chasing immediate results and start trusting long-term progress. You stop asking, what did I gain today? And start asking, what did I build today? Because building is different from gaining. Building is slow, intentional, foundational, and it requires patience. Now listen carefully. Patience is not passive. It's not waiting around. It's not doing nothing. Patience is active consistency without immediate reward. It's showing up even when nothing is happening. It's continuing even when progress is invisible. It's trusting even when there's no proof yet. And that kind of patience is rare because most people are addicted to quick wins. They want fast results, fast validation, fast success. But fast doesn't last because anything built quickly can collapse just as fast. But what you're building here is different. You're building discipline. You're building mental strength. You're building a mindset that does not depend on immediate outcomes. And that takes time, real time. Now here's where it becomes powerful. When you stop needing instant results, you become dangerous, because now nothing can discourage you. Not slow progress, not delayed rewards, not temporary setbacks. You keep moving because your focus is not on what you see, it's on what you're becoming. And that changes everything. Because now you're not just chasing results, you're building identity. And identity is what sustains long-term success. So the next time you feel like nothing is happening, pause and remind yourself, just because I can't see it doesn't mean it's not working, because growth is happening right now, under the surface, inside your habits, inside your thinking, inside your decisions. And one day it will show, but only if you stay, only if you continue, only if you don't quit too early. But here's the next challenge, because patience alone is not enough. There will be moments when everything feels repetitive, boring, monotonous, and your mind will start craving something new, something exciting, something different. And if you don't understand this next principle, you will sabotage your own progress, not because it's not working, but because it's not entertaining. And what you're about to discover next will completely change how you see boredom and why it might be the most important part of your growth. Chapter 8. Boredom is the gatekeeper of mastery. There comes a point, after the excitement fades, after the motivation disappears, after the initial energy is gone, when everything starts to feel the same. You wake up, you follow your routine, you do the work again and again and again. No thrill, no novelty, no emotional high, just repetition. And in that repetition, a new challenge appears. Not failure, not difficulty, boredom. And boredom is where most people quietly quit. Not because they can't continue, but because they don't want to. Because the mind craves stimulation. It wants something new, something exciting, something different. It gets tired of doing the same thing, even if that thing is working. And that's dangerous, because success is not built on excitement. It's built on repetition, doing the same things consistently over long periods of time. And that will never feel exciting every day. So when boredom hits, your mind starts looking for alternatives. Maybe I should try something else. Maybe this isn't the right path. Maybe I need a new approach. But often, that's not truth. That's distraction. Because what you're doing is working. It's just not entertaining anymore. And here's the shift that changes everything. Boredom is not a problem. Boredom is a signal that you are doing the right thing long enough for it to matter. Let that sink in. Because most people never reach this stage. They jump from one thing to another, always chasing novelty, always starting fresh, always restarting the cycle. And because of that, they never go deep. They never stay long enough to see results. But you're different now. You're learning to stay even when it's repetitive, even when it's quiet, even when it's boring. Because you understand something most people don't. Mastery lives on the other side of repetition, not excitement, not motivation, repetition. Let's go deeper. When something becomes boring, it means it's no longer new. And when it's no longer new, your brain stops releasing the same level of dopamine. It stops feeling rewarding, even if the outcome is valuable. So your mind starts searching for something else. something that feels better. But feeling better is not the goal. Becoming better is, and those two things are not always aligned. In fact, they often move in opposite directions, because becoming better requires doing what doesn't feel exciting over and over again. And that's where discipline becomes elite. Because now, you're not just pushing through difficulty, you're pushing through monotony. You're choosing consistency over stimulation. You're choosing growth over entertainment. And that's rare. Now, here's the key. Instead of trying to escape boredom, learn to embrace it. Because boredom is where focus sharpens. It's where distractions lose power. It's where you start paying attention to the details, to the small improvements, to the subtle changes. Because when the noise fades, clarity increases. And that's when real growth happens. Not in chaos, not in excitement, but in calm, consistent repetition. Now think about this. Every master in any field has gone through this phase. Athletes repeating the same movements, artists practicing the same strokes, entrepreneurs refining the same processes, day after day, year after year, without constant excitement, without constant validation, just repetition. And that repetition is what separates them. Not talent, not luck, consistency. So the next time you feel bored, don't run from it. Recognize it. This is part of the process. This is where most people quit. This is where I get ahead. Because every moment you stay when others would leave, you create distance. You build an edge. You become someone who doesn't need constant stimulation to keep going. And that's powerful, because now nothing can pull you off track. Not boredom, not distraction, not lack of excitement. You move because it's who you are, not because it feels good. But here's the next layer. Because even if you master boredom, even if you stay consistent, there's still something that can break your focus completely. Comparison. Because in a world where everyone is visible, where progress is constantly displayed, your mind will start measuring, judging, questioning, and if you don't learn how to control that, you will lose focus. Not because you stopped working, but because you started looking at everyone else. Chapter 9. Comparison is the thief of focus. There was a time when your only competition was who you were yesterday. No noise, no constant updates, no endless stream of other people's progress. Just you and your path. But now, everything is visible. Everyone is posting, everyone is sharing, everyone is showing results. And slowly, without even realizing it, your focus begins to shift. You stop looking at your own progress and start measuring it against others. Why are they ahead? How did they get there so fast? What am I doing wrong? And just like that, you lose something critical. Clarity. Because comparison doesn't motivate most people. It distracts them. It pulls their attention away from their own work and places it on someone else's timeline. And that is where discipline starts to break, because now you're no longer building your life. You're reacting to theirs. Let's go deeper. Every person you see is on a different path, different starting point, different struggles, different opportunities, different timing. But your mind ignores all of that. It simplifies everything into one dangerous thought. They're ahead. I'm behind. And that thought creates pressure, unnecessary pressure. Because now, you're not just trying to improve, you're trying to catch up. And when you feel like you're behind, you rush, You force things. You skip steps. You abandon processes that take time, all in an attempt to close a gap that was never meant to be measured. And that leads to burnout, frustration, inconsistency, self-doubt. Not because you're incapable, but because you're focused on the wrong thing. Now listen carefully. Comparison is not always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. But it's always destructive when it controls your focus. Because even when it feels like motivation, it often leads to distraction. You start switching strategies, changing directions, abandoning what works just because someone else is doing something different. And that resets your progress again and again and again until you feel stuck. But you're not stuck. You're scattered. There's a difference. And discipline requires focus, not on what others are doing, but on what you are building, because your path is not meant to look like anyone else's. It's meant to be walked step by step without constant comparison. Now here's the shift. Instead of asking, how do I compare? Start asking, how consistent am I? Because consistency is something you control. Other people's progress is not. And when you shift your focus back to yourself, everything changes. You stop rushing. You stop forcing. You stop doubting your timeline. And you start building again with clarity, with intention, with discipline. Now let's be real. You're going to see people ahead of you. That's inevitable. There will always be someone faster, someone further, someone more advanced. That doesn't mean you're behind. It means you're on your path. And your only responsibility is to stay on it. Because the moment you step off your path to chase someone else's, you lose direction. And without direction, discipline fades. So protect your focus. Guard your attention. Be intentional about what you consume, because what you see daily shapes how you think, and how you think shapes how you act. Now, here's a powerful question. If no one else's progress was visible, how would you move? Would you still feel behind? Would you still doubt your pace? Would you still question your path? Or would you simply keep going? Because that's the mindset you need, not blind to others, but anchored in yourself, focused on your process, committed to your growth, unaffected by external timelines. Because when you build that level of focus, you become unstoppable, not because you're faster than everyone else, but because you never stop moving. And movement is what creates results. But here's the next challenge, because even if you master focus, even if you stop comparing, there is still one thing that can quietly destroy your discipline without you even noticing. Excuses, not loud ones, not obvious ones, but subtle, convincing, logical excuses that feel like truth, but slowly pull you away from everything you're building. And what you're about to uncover next will expose how excuses really work and why they are far more dangerous than failure itself. Chapter 10. Excuses don't sound like lies. They sound like logic. There's something you need to understand, because it will change how you see your own thinking. Excuses don't feel like excuses. They feel like reasons, valid ones, convincing ones, even intelligent ones. That's why they're so dangerous. Because if excuses sounded weak, you would reject them immediately. But they don't. They sound like this. I'm just tired today. I'll do it when I have more time. I need to plan this better first. This isn't the right moment. And every single one of those thoughts feels justified, feels responsible, feels reasonable. But here's the truth. most excuses are not about logic. They are about avoiding discomfort. Let that sink in, because your mind is incredibly skilled at protecting you from effort, from uncertainty, from challenge, from anything that requires energy. And it doesn't do it aggressively. It does it intelligently. It creates narratives, stories that make inaction feel smart. So instead of saying, "I don't want to do this because it's hard," it says, "I'll do this later when I'm more prepared." And just like that, you delay. Not because you're lazy, but because your mind convinced you it's the right move. Now here's where it gets even more subtle. Excuses don't always stop you completely. Sometimes they just slow you down. You still move, but not with urgency. You still act, but not with full effort. You still try, but not consistently. And over time, that inconsistency compounds. It creates gaps, small ones at first. But those gaps grow until one day you realize you drifted, not because you made one big mistake, but because you accepted many small excuses. And that's how discipline erodes, quietly, gradually, without you noticing. So the goal is not to eliminate excuses completely. That's unrealistic. The goal is to recognize them, to see them for what they are. Patterns, not truth. Because once you can see an excuse, you can challenge it, you can question it, you can choose differently. But if you don't recognize it, you follow it automatically. Now, let's break this down in a powerful way. Every time you feel resistance, your mind will offer you two paths. One is uncomfortable, but leads to growth. The other is comfortable, but leads to stagnation. And your mind will always try to make the comfortable path sound logical. So instead of saying, "Stay where you are," it says, "You deserve a break." Instead of saying, "Avoid a challenge," it says, "You should wait until you're ready." Instead of saying, "Don't push yourself," it says, "Balance is important." Now understand, those statements are not always wrong. But in the moment of resistance, they are often misused. They become shields, ways to avoid what needs to be done. And if you don't learn to identify that, you will keep repeating the same patterns. So here's the shift. The next time you hear an excuse in your mind, pause and ask yourself, is this helping me grow, or is this helping me stay comfortable? Because that question cuts through the illusion. It forces clarity. And once you see the truth, you have a choice. Not an easy one, but a clear one. Now here's where discipline becomes real. Not when everything is aligned, not when motivation is high, but when the excuse sounds convincing and you act anyway. That's the moment that matters. Because every time you override an excuse, you strengthen your authority. You prove to yourself, I don't follow every thought, I don't obey every feeling, I choose. And that builds confidence, not the loud kind, not the temporary kind, but the deep kind. The kind that comes from evidence, from action, from consistency. Now let's take it even further. Excuses don't just affect your actions, they shape your identity. Because every time you accept an excuse, you reinforce a pattern. You teach your mind, this is how I respond. And over time, that response becomes automatic. It becomes who you are. But the opposite is also true. Every time you reject an excuse, you build a new identity. Someone who acts, someone who follows through, someone who does what needs to be done. And that identity changes everything. Because once you see yourself that way, you don't need constant motivation. You don't need external pressure. You simply act because it's who you are. But here's the next layer, because even if you master excuses, even if you build discipline, there will still be moments when you feel completely alone in your journey, when no one understands your focus, when no one supports your effort, when no one sees your progress. And in those moments, your strength will be tested in a different way, not by difficulty, but by isolation. And what you're about to discover next will show you how to stay strong, even when no one is watching, no one is clapping, and no one is walking the path with you. Dear viewer, please write in the comments how you like the video. Do you like it? Or is there anything you would improve? Please let us know so that we can make good, high-quality videos for you. Thank you very much. Chapter 11. When no one sees you, who do you become? There is a version of you that only exists when no one is watching. No audience, no recognition, no validation. Just you and your choices. And that version of you is the most important one, because that is where discipline is tested at its deepest level. Not in public, not when people are cheering, not when results are visible, but in private, in silence, when no one knows what you're doing or not doing, because it's easy to stay consistent. When there's pressure, when there's accountability, when there's expectation. But what happens when all of that disappears? What happens when no one checks on your progress? No one asks about your goals? No one notices your effort? Do you still show up, or do you slowly, quietly drift? This is where most people lose, not in failure, not in difficulty, but in isolation. Because when no one is watching, there is no external consequence for stopping. No one will call you out. No one will question you. No one will even know. And that creates a dangerous freedom, the freedom to quit, without accountability. And if your discipline depends on being seen, it will not survive in silence. But real discipline doesn't need an audience. It doesn't rely on praise. It doesn't depend on recognition. It operates because it's internal, because it's part of who you are. Now listen carefully. The person you are in private is the person you become in public, not the image, not the performance, the reality. Because your private actions are your true habits, and your habits create your results. So if you only show discipline when it's visible, you're not building discipline. You're performing, and performance is temporary, but identity is permanent. So the question becomes, who are you when no one is watching? Do you still follow through? Do you still stay focused? Do you still act with intention? Or do you relax your standards, lower your effort, delay your actions? Because every time you choose comfort in private, you weaken your foundation. And that foundation is what everything else is built on. Now here's the shift. You have to become your own accountability, not sometimes, always. You have to hold yourself to a standard that does not depend on external pressure, because if you can do that, you become unstoppable, not because you're perfect, but because you're consistent, even in silence, even in isolation, even when it would be easier not to. Let's go deeper. There will be days when no one supports you, when people don't understand your focus, when they question your priorities, when they don't see your vision. And that can be difficult because as humans, we crave connection. We crave understanding. We want people to see what we see, but sometimes they won't. And that's okay, because your journey is not theirs. Your path is not meant to be validated by everyone, and if you wait for approval, you will delay your progress. So you have to learn to move without constant support, to build without constant recognition, to continue without constant reassurance. Because the truth is, most of the work that changes your life happens in silence. Early mornings, late nights, quiet decisions, no applause, no spotlight, just effort. And that effort is what builds everything. Now here's something powerful. When you learn to operate without needing validation, you gain freedom. Freedom from opinions, freedom from expectations, freedom from comparison. You stop seeking approval and start building results. And that shift is rare because most people are driven by external feedback, likes, comments, recognition. But those things are temporary. They don't build discipline. They don't sustain consistency. They don't create long-term results. Only internal standards do that. So build those standards, define them clearly, decide, this is who I am, even when no one is watching, and then live it, daily, quietly, consistently. Because the more you act that way in private, the more natural it becomes in public, and eventually, there is no difference. You become the same person everywhere, and that is integrity, that is strength, that is discipline. But now we go deeper, because even if you master isolation, even if you build internal accountability, there is still something that can break your consistency completely: burnout. Because pushing forward constantly, without understanding your limits, without managing your energy, can lead to exhaustion. And exhaustion can feel like failure, but it's not. And what you're about to discover next will show you how to balance intensity with sustainability, so you don't just start strong, but finish stronger. Chapter 12. Burnout is not weakness, it's mismanaged energy. There's a moment, and it often gets misunderstood. You've been consistent. You've been disciplined. You've been pushing forward day after day, effort after effort, without stopping. And then suddenly, you feel drained, not just tired, empty. The same tasks feel heavier. The same goals feel distant. The same drive fades. And your mind starts asking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I keep going like before? Am I losing my discipline? But here's the truth. Burnout is not a sign that you're weak. It's a sign that you've been strong without balance. Let that sink in, because most people misunderstand burnout. They think it means they've failed, that they've lost their edge, that they're not as disciplined as they thought. But burnout is not failure. It's feedback. It's your system telling you something needs to adjust, not stop. Adjust, because discipline is not about constant intensity. It's about sustainable consistency. And those are two very different things. Let's go deeper. Intensity feels powerful. It feels productive. It feels like progress. You push hard. You do more. You go all in. But intensity is temporary. You can't operate at maximum output forever. Your mind needs recovery. Your body needs rest. Your focus needs space. And if you ignore that, you don't become stronger. You become depleted. And when depletion sets in, everything slows down. Your thinking becomes cloudy. Your motivation drops. Your resistance increases. And that's where people get confused. They think, I need to push harder. But pushing harder is what created the problem. What you need is alignment. between effort and recovery, between discipline and awareness, between pushing and resetting. Because the goal is not to go as hard as possible. The goal is to keep going as long as necessary, and that requires balance. Now listen carefully. Balance does not mean comfort. It does not mean avoiding effort. It does not mean slowing down unnecessarily. It means understanding your limits and working with them, not against them. Because if you constantly push past your limits without recovery, you will break, not physically, mentally. And mental exhaustion is far more dangerous because when your mind is tired, discipline fades, not because you've changed, but because your energy is gone. So the key is this. You don't just train discipline, you manage energy. You become aware of your capacity. You learn when to push and when to reset. And that creates sustainability. Let's make this practical. There are 3 states you need to understand. High energy, medium energy, low energy. Most people only operate based on high energy. When they feel good, they work. When they don't, they stop. But discipline means adapting. When your energy is high, you push. You go deeper. You do the hard things. You build momentum. When your energy is medium, you maintain. You stay consistent. You follow your system. You keep moving. When your energy is low, you simplify. You reduce intensity, but not action. You focus on smaller tasks. You protect the habit because the goal is not perfection. The goal is continuity. You never break the chain. Even if the effort is smaller, even if the progress feels slower, you keep going. And that prevents burnout because now you're not forcing yourself beyond your limits. You're working with your reality. And that's sustainable. Now here's the deeper layer. Burnout often comes from pressure, not just effort. Pressure to succeed, pressure to improve, pressure to prove something. And that pressure creates tension, constant tension. And tension drains energy. So you have to shift your mindset from pressure to process, from outcome to action. Because when you focus only on results, every day feels heavy. Every delay feels frustrating. Every setback feels personal. But when you focus on the process, you stay grounded. You stay present. You stay consistent. And that reduces mental strain. Now here's the most important part. Our rest is not quitting. Recovery is not weakness. Pausing is not failure. It is part of the system. Because without recovery, there is no long-term performance, no sustained discipline, no lasting results. So, learn to reset without losing direction. Rest your mind without abandoning your path. Step back without stepping away. Because that's how you stay in the game, not just for a moment, but for the long run. But now we go deeper. Because even if you master energy, even if you avoid burnout, there is still something that can quietly pull you off track. Your identity. Because how you see yourself will determine how you act in every situation. And if your identity is not aligned with the person you're trying to become, you will keep sabotaging your own progress without even realizing it. Chapter 13. You don't rise above your identity. You act from it. There is something deeper than discipline, deeper than habits, deeper than systems, deeper than motivation, and it controls everything you do, whether you realize it or not. Your identity, not what you say you are, not what you want to be, but what you believe you are, because every action you take is a reflection of that belief. Let's make this real. If you believe you are someone who struggles to stay consistent, you will act accordingly. You will start strong, but expect to fall off. You will try, but not fully commit, because deep down, you're not convinced you're capable of more, and that belief becomes your limit. But if you believe you are someone who follows through, someone who doesn't quit, someone who does what needs to be done, your actions change, not because it's easier, but because it aligns with who you are. And that's the shift. You don't become disciplined by forcing actions. You become disciplined by changing identity. Let that settle, because most people focus only on behavior. They try to change what they do without changing how they see themselves. And that creates friction, constant friction, because their actions don't match their identity. And when there's a mismatch, the identity wins. Always. So, if you see yourself as inconsistent, no system will save you. If you see yourself as someone who quits, no motivation will sustain you, because eventually you will return to what feels familiar, to what feels like you. That's why identity is everything. It is the foundation, the filter through which every decision is made. Now here's the powerful part. Identity is not fixed. It is built through repetition, through evidence, through action. Every time you act in a certain way, you cast a vote for that identity. Small vote, but it counts. Do it once, and it's a possibility. Do it repeatedly, and it becomes who you are. So if you want to become someone who never gives up, you don't start by saying it. You start by proving it in small ways, daily, consistently. You finish what you start, even when it's small. You follow through, even when it's inconvenient. You stay, even when it's uncomfortable. And every time you do that, you reinforce a new identity. I am someone who doesn't quit, not because you said it, but because you showed it. Now listen carefully. You don't need to be perfect to build this identity. You don't need flawless execution. You need consistency, because identity is not built on one moment. It's built on patterns, repeated behavior over time. So stop waiting for a big breakthrough and start focusing on small proof. Every action matters. Every decision counts, because you are constantly shaping who you are, whether you're aware of it or not. Now here's the challenge. Your old identity will resist change. It will try to pull you back. It will remind you of past failures, past inconsistencies, past patterns. It will say, this isn't you. You've tried before. You always fall off. And if you listen, you reinforce the old version. But if you act anyway, you break it. You create distance between who you were and who you're becoming. And that distance is where transformation happens. So the next time you feel resistance, don't just think about the task. Think about the identity. Ask yourself, what would someone who doesn't quit do right now? And then do that, even if it's small, even if it's imperfect, because that action is building something bigger than the moment. It's building you. Now here's where it becomes powerful. When your identity shifts, discipline becomes natural. You don't need to force it. You don't need to fight yourself. You simply act because it aligns with who you are. And that's freedom. Freedom from constant struggle. Freedom from internal conflict. Freedom from inconsistency. Because now you're not trying to be disciplined. You are disciplined. But here's the next layer. Because even with a strong identity, even with discipline in place, There will still be moments when life hits you unexpectedly. Moments you didn't plan for. Challenges you didn't see coming. Situations that shake your structure, and in those moments, your ability to adapt will determine whether you stay on track or fall apart completely. And what you're about to discover next will show you how to stay grounded, even when everything around you changes. Chapter 14, Adaptability is the discipline behind discipline. There's a truth you will face, not once, but many times. Life will not follow your plan. No matter how clear your system is, no matter how strong your routine becomes, something will interrupt it. Unexpected problems, changes in schedule, loss, pressure, chaos. And in those moments, you will feel it, that sudden shift, that internal reaction that says, everything is off now. I can't follow my routine. I'll get back on track later. And just like that, discipline starts to slip. Not because you chose to quit, but because your structure was broken. And here's the reality most people never prepare for. Discipline is not about perfect conditions. It's about maintaining direction in imperfect ones. Because if your consistency only exists when everything is aligned, it's not real consistency. It's convenience. And convenience does not survive pressure. So the question becomes, what happens when things don't go as planned? Do you stop or do you adapt? Because adaptability is the hidden layer of discipline. It's what allows you to continue, even when your system is disrupted. Let's go deeper. Most people build rigid routines, exact schedules, exact steps, exact expectations. And when something breaks that structure, they feel lost. They feel like they've failed. They feel like they have to start over. But that's the mistake, because life is not predictable. It will not always give you perfect conditions. So if your discipline depends on perfection, it will collapse under pressure. But if you build adaptability, you create resilience. You create flexibility without losing direction. Now listen carefully. Adaptability does not mean lowering your standards. It means adjusting your approach while keeping your commitment. That's the difference. You don't say, I can't do my full routine, so I'll do nothing. You say, I can't do everything, but I can do something. And that something is what keeps you moving, because the goal is not perfection. The goal is continuity. You stay in motion, even if the pace changes, even if the structure shifts, even if the conditions are not ideal. You continue. Now let's make this real. Imagine your day gets disrupted, your schedule is thrown off. Your time is limited, your energy is lower than expected. Most people react like this. I'll skip today and restart tomorrow. But tomorrow becomes another delay, another break in the chain, another step backward. But someone with adaptable discipline responds differently. They ask, what can I still do right now? Maybe it's shorter, maybe it's less intense, maybe it's not perfect, but it's something. And that something preserves the habit. It protects the identity. It keeps the momentum alive, and that's powerful. Because momentum is fragile. It's easy to build, but even easier to lose. And once you lose it, starting again becomes harder. So adaptability is how you protect it. Now here's the deeper layer. Life will test you in ways you can't prepare for. Situations that challenge your focus, moments that drain your energy, events that shake your stability. And in those moments, you won't have a perfect plan. You won't have clarity. You won't feel ready. But you will still have a choice to stop or to adjust. Becoming unbreakable. There is a version of you that does not exist yet, not fully. You've seen glimpses of it, moments where you pushed further than expected, moments where you stayed when quitting was easier. But you haven't lived there consistently, not yet, because becoming unbreakable is not a moment. It's a transformation, and it happens slowly, through everything you've just experienced. Through discipline, through failure, through boredom, through repetition, through pain, piece by piece, you've been building something not visible from the outside, but undeniable within. Now listen carefully. Being unbreakable does not mean nothing affects you. It means nothing stops you. You still feel doubt. You still feel fear. You still feel pressure, but you move anyway. You continue anyway. You stay anyway. And that is power, not loud power, not temporary power, but quiet, controlled, relentless power. The kind that doesn't need validation, the kind that doesn't depend on conditions, the kind that simply keeps going. Now let's go deeper. Being unbreakable is not about never falling. It's about always returning, faster, stronger, more aware, because life will still hit you unexpectedly, sometimes unfairly. And there will be moments where you feel like everything is slipping. But the difference now is that you don't stay down. You don't disappear. You don't lose yourself. You reset. You adjust. You continue. And that ability is everything. Because most people don't fail permanently. They just stop returning. They stay down longer than necessary. They let one moment define their entire path. But you've learned something different. You've learned that nothing is final unless you decide it is. And that realization makes you unbreakable. Now here's the shift. You stop fearing setbacks. You stop fearing bad days. You stop fearing moments of weakness because you know they don't define you. Your response does, and your response is to continue, always. Now ask yourself, what could actually stop me if I never choose to stop? Think about that. Not failure, not delay, not difficulty. Only one thing, your decision. And once you understand that, you realize something powerful. You are in control, not of everything that happens, but of whether you continue. And that is enough. Now here's where everything comes together. Discipline is no longer something you try to have. It's something you live. Consistency is no longer something you chase. It's something you embody. Purpose is no longer something you search for. It's something you act from. Because now you are aligned internally, and when you are aligned, nothing can break you, not permanently. Now here's the truth. You will still have hard days, days where everything feels heavy, days where motivation disappears, days where progress feels invisible. But those days no longer control you because you've built something stronger than emotion, identity. And identity does not change daily. It holds, it stabilizes, it guides. And that's what keeps you moving. Now listen carefully. This is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of a new standard, a new way of operating, a new way of living, where quitting is no longer your default, where discipline is no longer a struggle, where consistency is no longer optional. But now we arrive at the final chapter, the moment where everything you've learned turns into something real, something lived, something embodied, because knowledge alone does not change your life. Action does. And what you're about to step into next is not another lesson, but a decision, a decision that will define everything moving forward.